picture this. You're sitting in a fancy lawyer's office, your palms are sweaty with excitement, and the air is tense. Suddenly, one phrase changes everything. I get $15 million. And my parents' faces instantly turn from indifferent to predatory. What has my grandfather been hiding all these years? And why did he leave such a fortune to me? If you want to know how wealth can ruin even the closest relationships, stay with me. But before you dive into this exciting story, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new, shocking stories of family drama. Like if you're interested in learning what secrets are hidden behind the veil of wealth, and write in the comments, what would you do if you received an inheritance that could change your life forever? My name is Sophia Clark. I'm 26 years old. I'm sitting in my grandfather's lawyer's office, surrounded by relatives who rarely visited him while he was alive. My palms are sweating as James Harris, the lawyer for my grandfather, Robert Clark, reads the will. To my beloved granddaughter, Sophia, I leave $15 million. The room goes silent. The heads of my parents, Andrew and Catherine Clark, snap toward me, their expressions ranging from boredom to predatory interest. Before I continue my story, let me tell you a little about my childhood. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I never knew the kind of family warmth that most children dream of. My parents were always more concerned with status and appearance than with parenting. Our huge, modernist house was impressive to visitors, but inside those walls there was little warmth. The man who filled that void was my grandfather, Robert Clark. He built his fortune from scratch, starting with a small repair shop in the 1970s that would eventually grow into Clartech, an electronics corporation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Unlike my parents, he never flaunted his wealth. He wore the same Casio watch for 30 years and drove old Japanese cars as long as they could drive. Money is just a tool, Sophia, he would tell me on our Sunday strolls in the park. It's what you build with it that counts. While my parents were vacationing in the Maldives or partying in Los Angeles, my grandfather taught me to fish, fix tech, and most importantly, to appreciate people for their character, not their bank accounts. He was at every school play, science fair, and graduation when my parents were busy with important social events. I inherited his practicality. After graduating from Oregon State University with degrees in environmental design and photography, I shocked my family by turning down a comfortable position at Clartech. Instead, I pursued a career as a documentary photographer specializing in conservation.
"You're throwing away your opportunities," my father had yelled during one of our last big fights 3 years ago. "Do you realize what people would give for those kinds of chances?" "I create my own opportunities," I had responded calmly, which only made him angrier. My mother was more subtle but equally judgmental. "Darling, it's wonderful that you have these hobbies. But surely you can do them and still maintain a respectable social status." I moved in the next day, into a modest studio apartment downtown that I shared with my best friend, Lisa Bennett. We'd met in our first year of university and bonded over our shared love of photography and nature. Unlike everyone else around me, Lisa had never cared about my family name or connections. She judged me purely on who I was. My lifestyle baffled my status-conscious relatives. I drove a reliable but unremarkable Ford Focus, wore clothes for comfort rather than designer labels, and spent my savings on photography equipment and conservation projects rather than jewelry or exotic vacations. The only luxury I allowed myself was an annual contribution to the Northwest Coast Conservation Fund, a tradition that began with my grandfather when I was 14. "Your parents think money is for show," he once told me.
They never understood that true wealth is having enough to help others without worrying about having enough for yourself. My grandfather's health had begun to fail the previous winter. Cancer, an aggressive kind that was difficult to treat. I immediately put my international assignments on hold and moved into his guest room to help him in his final months. My parents showed up sporadically, always with their lawyer, trying to discuss the estate while he was still conscious. He sent them away, insisting there was time for such conversations later. They circled him like vultures, he confided to me one evening as we watched the sunset from his favorite chair. Your father has been taking advances on his inheritance for decades, he said. If you only knew I already knew about their financial shenanigans. I held his hand when my grandfather passed away, peacefully in his sleep. My parents arrived 2 hours later, immediately demanding the key to his home office. The funeral last week turned into a spectacle that would have horrified my grandfather. My parents insisted on the most expensive casket, the most extravagant floral arrangements, and a reception at the Ritz-Carlton that felt more like a networking event than a memorial. I stood in the corner with Lisa, watching as relatives who had barely noticed my grandfather in life suddenly became filled with grief, or perhaps anticipation. Are you okay? Lisa asked, handing me a glass of water. She knew I didn't drink alcohol at family events. It was too important to keep my wits about me. Just trying to get through this with some dignity, I replied, watching as my cousin Alex cornered the family lawyer. Alex had always been my main competitor for my grandfather's attention, though he sought it through ostentatious displays of success rather than genuine connection. Your grandfather would hate this circus, Lisa said. He'd find it bloody funny, actually, I corrected her with a rueful smile. You find out who people really are when money comes into play, he always said. Little did I know how prophetic those words would prove. The will reading was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the offices of Harris and Partners. I arrived 15 minutes early with Lisa for moral support, to find the elegant reception area already half full of relatives. Sophia, darling. My mother air-kissed both my cheeks, her Chanel No. 5 stunning. She looked as immaculate as ever, not a single blonde hair out of place despite her supposed grief. We've saved you a seat between us. Thank you, but I'm fine here with Lisa, I replied, choosing a seat towards the back of the room. My father didn't even bother to be polite, merely nodding in my direction as he continued his hushed conversation with Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, who had always been jealous of my grandfather for giving my father a larger role in the family business, despite being the youngest son. The conference room we were eventually ushered into screamed old money, with its mahogany tables, leather chairs, and portraits of the stern men in suits who had founded the firm. I recognized most of the family present. Aunt Margaret, Uncle Robert's wife, fiddling with her pearl necklace, my cousins Alex and Emily, great Aunt Edna, my grandfather's only surviving sister, who looked genuinely saddened, and several other distant relatives, whom I suspected were as distant from my grandfather's thoughts as they were physically. James Harris entered last, carrying a leather briefcase. At 70, he had been my grandfather's contemporary friend and legal advisor through decades of business deals and family matters. His silver hair and bow tie gave him the air of a venerable professor rather than a corporate lawyer. Thank you all for coming today, he began formally. Before we begin the formal proceedings, let me offer my personal condolences. Robert was not only my client, but a dear friend for more than 40 years. My father cleared his throat impatiently. We appreciate your sentiments, James, but perhaps we could move on. Harris's expression did not change, but I noticed a slight tension around his eyes. Of course, Andrew. I understand that you want to move on. As Harris began with the legal preamble, my mind flashed back to my last face-to-face conversation with my grandfather, just 3 days before his death. He had been having a good day, clear-headed and almost energetic. The nurse helped him into a chair, and he asked me to get his old leather journal. "Sophia," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I want you to know that I've made all the necessary arrangements. You have nothing to worry about." "Grandpa, I don't want to talk about the will," I protested. He smiled, his eyes still twinkling with mischief. "It's not just about money, it's about fairness and consequences. Some people have waited a long time for a payout they didn't deserve." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You'll understand soon enough," he replied. "Just remember, whatever happens, I've thought it through carefully. Trust James. He'll know what to do." The memory faded as Harris began reading the actual wills. As expected, there were many small gifts. $10,000 to his longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Taylor. $20,000 to his gardener of 30 years. Donations to his favorite charities. Small keepsakes for friends. Great Aunt Edna was left a modest but comfortable annuity to ensure her final years were free from financial worries. The atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense as the major holdings remained unsettled. My cousin Alex kept checking his watch, and my father's leg twitched nervously under the table. I could feel my mother's gaze periodically burning into me, though I couldn't figure out why. "Now about Clartek," Harris continued, eliciting a slight tilt of the head from everyone. "As you know, Robert retained a controlling interest in the company until his death. His shares will be placed in a trust managed by the board of directors, with profits distributed as follows." The next few minutes describe the complex system that essentially kept the company together by distributing modest dividends to various family members. My father got a seat on the board, but not the controlling interest he had clearly expected. I could see his knuckles turning white as he gripped the arms of his chair. "That's not right," Uncle Robert interrupted. "The company should go directly to the family, not be run by a board of directors." "These are Robert's explicit wishes," Harris replied firmly. "If you challenge them, there are contingent plans that will result in the immediate sale of the company to the employees via an ESOP. I strongly advise against challenging these terms." That silenced the room. My grandfather walked around them all. Alex leaned over to whisper something to my father, who shook his head sharply. The tension was building like a storm cloud, and I sensed the worst was yet to come. Harris continued through several smaller bequests, including my grandfather's classic car collection to a transportation museum and his art collection to various cultural institutions. With each announcement, my father's expression grew darker. The family vacation home in Oregon was going to Great Aunt Edna, and the ski cabin in Colorado was to be sold with the proceeds going to conservation projects. And the principal assets? My mother broke down, unable to contain herself any longer. "The house in Portland?" "I'm getting to that, Catherine," Harris said with the patience of a man accustomed to dealing with difficult clients. "But first there is a matter that Robert considered of the utmost importance." He looked directly at me for the first time since the reading. In that moment, I felt a chill of foreboding. Something momentous was about to happen, and it seemed I was at the center of it. "To my beloved granddaughter, Sophia Clark," Harris read, his voice warming. "I leave the sum of $15 million to be transferred forthwith upon the reading of this will to trust funds established in her name." The silence that followed was absolute. I felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. $15 million. The amount was unimaginable to me. I made good money as a photographer, but it was money I could not spend in several lifetimes. The silence was shattered as several voices exploded at once. This is outrageous, my father shouted, standing up so suddenly that his chair rolled back and hit the wall. There has to be some mistake, my mother added, her perfect facade cracking. Alex let loose a stream of expletives that drew a cry from Great Aunt Edna. I remained frozen in the chaos, unable to process what I had just heard. Lisa gripped my hand under the table, holding me back. Harris raised his hands for silence. There's one more thing. When the noise died down a bit, he continued. This will is accompanied by a personal note from Robert. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. With trembling fingers, I opened it and unfolded the letter inside, immediately recognizing my grandfather's familiar handwriting. My dear Sophia, I read silently to myself as the room watched. If you're reading this, I've moved on to my next adventure. Don't grieve too much. I've lived a good life. The money I left you represents not only my love for you, but my complete trust in your judgment and character. Unlike others who viewed my wealth as their birthright, you always worked for what you wanted and valued people more than things. You may be wondering why the amount is so large. The answer is simple. You're the only person I trust to use it wisely. I've watched you grow into a woman of principles and compassion. Your work documenting and protecting endangered species has made me prouder than any business deal I've ever made. Some family members will be unhappy with my decision. Let them be. Their reactions will only confirm what I already know about their character. James has documentation that will explain more, but suffice it to say that some people have already taken far more than their fair share from me in my lifetime. Use this money to make your dreams come true, Sophia. Start that wildlife fund we talked about. Travel, learn, grow. Just promise me you'll never let wealth change who you really are. With eternal love and confidence, grandfather. I looked up, tears blurring my vision, to see my parents had shifted in front of me. Their expressions had changed completely, anger replaced by unconvincing smiles. Sophia, dear, my mother began in her most obsequious tone, what a wonderful surprise. Your grandfather was always so kind to you. My father nodded vigorously. We must discuss investment strategies immediately. I have several options. Catherine, Andrew, Harris interrupted. There is something else in the will that directly affects you. They reluctantly returned to their seats, though my mother took the chair next to me, stroking my arm in a gesture of forced tenderness that made my skin crawl. To my son Andrew and his wife Catherine, Harris continued reading, I leave the sum of $75,000 with the express recommendation that they pay off their considerable debts. My father's face flushed. This is absurd. A pittance after all I've done for the company. Harris ignored the outburst. In addition, Andrew and Catherine are required to vacate the Portland home they have occupied rent-free within 30 days. The property will be placed in a trust with terms to be disclosed separately. My mother's hand froze on mine. But where would we go? This is our home. It was never your house, Catherine, Harris corrected gently. It always remained in Robert's name. He let you live there as a favor. The reading continued with several additional wills, but I barely heard them. My mind was stunned by the implications. Not only had my grandfather left me a fortune, but he had effectively cut off my parents. A mere $75,000 would not cover their debts, if they were as large as my grandfather had implied. As the formal reading ended and family members began to disperse, some stopping to congratulate me on my transparent insincerity, others too angry to acknowledge me at all, Harris asked me to stay behind for a private conversation. And your parents too, please, he added as they tried to usher me out. When the room was empty except for the four of us and Lisa, who insisted on her presence, Harris opened another folder. Robert asked me to share this information confidentially, he explained, sliding several documents across the table. They were records of loans made to Andrew and Catherine over the past 10 years, totaling nearly $6 million. None of them had been repaid. My father didn't even try to deny it. They were advances on my inheritance, not loans. They were technically documented as loans, Harris corrected, with interest terms that were also not met. We're family, my mother countered. William understood our situation. We have to maintain a certain standard. Harris continued as if she hadn't said anything. In addition, there is the matter of unauthorized withdrawals from several Clartech accounts managed by Andrew. The forensic audit report is quite detailed. My father paled. These were legitimate business expenses. The house in Montana, the yacht, the debts at the Las Vegas casino. Harris raised an eyebrow. Robert chose not to pursue criminal charges during his lifetime out of concern for the family reputation, but he was fully aware of these actions. I felt physically sick. The father who lectured me about responsibility and the proper use of family resources had been stealing from his own father all along. That's why Sophia got most of the liquid assets, Harris concluded. Robert no longer trusted you with significant amounts. That's ridiculous, Andrew, my father snapped at me. Sophia, you can't really need $15 million. As your parents, we expect you to make the right choices here. The right choices, my mother interjected smoothly. What exactly are you asking for? I asked, already knowing the answer. We need at least $8 million to cover our obligations and maintain our lifestyle, my father stated, as if discussing the weather. That's fair, my mother added. I looked at them, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time. These people who prioritized social status over parenting, who skipped my college graduation to party on a yacht, who criticized every choice I made that didn't align with their materialistic values, were now demanding that I get them out of a mess of their own making. No, I said simply. What did you say? My father's voice dropped dangerously. I said no. I'm not giving you any money. Harris cleared his throat. Before we continue this discussion, Robert asked me to give Sophia this. He pulled out a check, an actual paper check, made out to me for $15 million. He thought you might want something tangible to commemorate the moment, even though the funds had already been wired electronically. I took the check, looking at the incredible amount written on it. This discussion is not over, my father warned as Harris ushered us all out. We'll continue at home. Not your house anymore, I reminded him quietly, still clutching the check. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet my parents at my grandfather's house later that day. Lisa offered to come with me, but I would have this conversation alone. Just keep your phone on, she advised, and call me if things get weird. Define weird, I joked weakly, when it comes to my family. The house where I'd spent so many happy hours with my grandfather now seemed desecrated by my parents' presence. They were waiting in his study. My father paced by the windows overlooking the garden. My mother sat on the leather sofa, her posture tense. Sophia, my father began without preamble, you have to understand our position. Everything we did was for the sake of this family's legacy. What legacy? I asked, remaining standing by the door. The legacy of living beyond your means, of taking advantage of your grandfather's generosity, of squandering it. Don't be dramatic, my mother interrupted. Your grandfather spoiled you because you were his pet project, an artistic granddaughter with her cameras and ideals. He thought it was charming. But running this family requires more than charity and wildlife photography. And what exactly did you contribute to the family, Mom? Besides spending her money? My father slammed his hand on my grandfather's desk. Enough. We're your parents. We gave you everything. The best schools, the connections, the opportunities. Grandfather gave me those things, I corrected, when he wasn't busy righting your wrongs. You ungrateful little... He trailed off, clearly trying to regain control. Look, your grandfather wasn't himself at the end. Cancer drugs. His judgment was impaired. It's funny how you never questioned his judgment when he bailed you out of your financial disasters. My mother changed tack, her voice softening. Darling, we know you're grieving. We all are. But think what that money could mean to all of us. We could settle our temporary financial difficulties, fix up the country houses, ensure that the family name remained respectable in the right circles. You mean you could go on pretending to be richer than you are without contributing anything to the world around you? You're an ungrateful girl. My father had lost all pretense of politeness. After all we've sacrificed for you. And what exactly have you sacrificed? I demanded. As far as I'm concerned, grandfather was making all the sacrifices while you two were taking advantage of his kindness. My father made a visible effort to calm himself, adjusting his tie. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to transfer the $8 million into our accounts. We're going to take care of the family obligations, pay off our debts, and everyone can move forward without scandal or litigation. And if I refuse? Then we're going to contest the will, my mother said. We're going to charge undue influence, impaired capacity on Robert's part. It's going to be messy, public. Your grandfather's private financial decisions will be dragged into probate court. His mental health will be in question. Is this what you want for his estate? I felt the chill of their willingness to desecrate my grandfather's memory for money. Harris is confident the will is infallible. Harris is not infallible, my father snorted. And neither is my father. We'll tie this money up in lawsuits for years. You won't see a cent while the lawyers fight. Okay, I said one last time. Let me think about it. The relief had clearly washed over them. They thought they'd won. There's our sensible girl. My mother smiled, reaching out to stroke my cheek. I backed away. I said I'd think about it. I agreed to nothing. Where's the check? My father asked suddenly. In my bag, I said, gesturing to the bag I'd placed on the side table. He moved with surprising speed for a man in his 60s, snatching my bag before I could react. What are you doing? I demanded, trying to snatch it back. Ensuring you make the right decision, he growled, dumping the contents on my grandfather's desk and rifling through it until he found the check. Give it back. It's for your own good, Sophia, my mother insisted, stepping between us. You're not thinking clearly. I've never thought clearer, I snapped, trying to push past her. Gimme the check, I shouted, trying to push past my mother, but my father was already holding it over his head like a trophy. Think carefully, Sophia, he said, his voice menacing. This is your last chance to do the right thing. My mother pulled out her gold lighter, the same one some European aristocrat had given her at a charity event. Do you know what will happen if we bring a flame to this symbolic gesture of your grandfather's? She hissed, clicking the lighter. A strange calm came over me. I stopped struggling and laughed. Do what you want. This check is just a symbol. The money was wired long ago. Their faces went pale. My father froze with the check raised. You're lying, he whispered, but there was uncertainty in his voice. I pulled out my phone and showed them the balance of one of the trust accounts. $10 million stared at them from the screen. My mother dropped the lighter and my father slowly lowered the check. At that moment, James Harris walked into the room with 2 security guards. Mr. and Mrs. Clark, I must ask you to leave this room, he said calmly. My father started to shout something about lawsuits and lawsuits, but Harris interrupted him. Speaking of lawsuits, we have documentation of the embezzlement of Clartech funds over the past few years. I think the board of directors will be very interested in this data. My mother grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. You wouldn't dare. We would, Harris replied. Robert didn't want to embarrass you when he was alive, but that's not the case now. After they left, I sat in my grandfather's office for a long time, looking at the photographs on the wall. There were pictures of his youth, his early days in the workshop, family picnics. Each frame told the story of a man who was building not just a business, but real values. The next morning, I woke up with a clear plan of action. The first thing I did was officially buy the mansion, turning it into the headquarters of a new Northwest Coast Conservation Trust. Lisa became my first employee, and cousin Emily, who had always hidden her love of ecology from her family of status, joined us later. We started by purchasing 500 acres of critical habitat in the western part of the state. Our first exhibit, Invisible Oregon, featured rare species struggling to survive. At the opening, I noticed Alex standing in the corner of the room. Later, he came up to me. "You know, you were right all these years," he said quietly. "I want to help. Maybe start educational programs for kids?" A year after my grandfather died, I stood on a hilltop watching the sunrise illuminate our nature preserve. 3,000 acres of protected land, a research center, educational programs for schools. All of this became a reality thanks to my grandfather's wisdom and my desire to follow his principles. My parents sent a letter one day. They wrote about how they had learned to live modestly, work for hire, and find joy in simple things. I didn't know if it was genuine remorse or a new tactic, but for the first time, I felt I could forgive. The greatest achievement was not the number of acres saved or the funds raised, but the understanding that true wealth is the ability to change the world for the better while remaining true to your principles. It was this lesson from my grandfather that I used every day to build something more than just a foundation, to create a legacy of real values. And my grandfather's old leather journal, found in his safe, became my constant advisor. In it, I found answers to the most difficult questions and inspiration for new projects. Especially one entry, made shortly before his illness. True wealth is measured not by what we get, but by what we give. Not by the money we accumulate, but by the lives we change. Not by the power we wield, but by the opportunities we create for others. This is the principle I live by every day as I continue the journey my amazing grandfather began. And when I sit in his favorite chair at night, watching the sunset, I know he would be proud of who I have become and what I have learned. Because the most valuable inheritance is not the money in the bank, but the wisdom with which we learn to use it. If you enjoyed this story, please like it and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think truly defines wealth? Have you ever had to resist family pressure? Your experiences may inspire others. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about navigating difficult family situations and building an authentic life based on true values. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance is not what's in your bank account, but the wisdom to use it wisely.